Hi everyone, and welcome to StudioJake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Berry. Hope you had a wonderful Valentine's and President's Day weekend. It's amazing how they all kind of came together. Be sure to like this video and share it out. If you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to this channel, but also ring that little bell because YouTube is doing this thing where they are curating your subscription feed instead of listing it in chronological order. So you'll get notifications when I premiere a video or post one, and you'll get an email. That way you can keep up on all the latest. So on Facebook, be sure to turn on the notifications for that platform as well. That way these videos don't get lost in your shuffle of all your friends' cat videos and whatnot. Thank you so much for watching today. We have two topics, probably three, but because I'm not sure if I'm going to split one or the other. You'll find out in the video, I guess. But we're going to be covering the latest Zack Snyder, release the Snyder Cut drama, and of course, we're going to talk about Venom 2, and the subtopic of that is Sony announces a mysterious new Marvel film, but they're being very silent on what it's supposed to be. What could it be? I'm going to talk about the most likelies and the most unlikelies for that as well. So three topics that might merge into one. I'm not sure yet. So sit back, relax, and welcome to Studio Jake. Alright, so the first topic is, of course, we're talking about the latest Zack Snyder released the Snyder Cut drama. Now, as most of you know, I am very critical of Zack Snyder films. I think they're awful. I think he is a poor director. I think his only good film was 300. Outside of that, his movies, they're kind of like Christmas presents. So you have this really beautifully wrapped Christmas present. It's got a real pretty bow. It might even come with a really nice card. But then when you open it, it's just socks. And you get it from your rich uncle, and you have to kind of grin and bear and say thank you, even though you didn't really want that, but you really liked and appreciated how much care they took in wrapping it. And see, those are Zack Snyder films. Visually stunning, great soundtracks, but ultimately the plot is so thin and has no weight to it, yet somehow overly long. You just get pulled into it a little bit, but ultimately it's sound and fury and represents nothing. Um, and this is particularly true of The Watchmen, one of the most dumbest superhero movies of all time. I'm not even a Watchmen fan to begin with. I personally think that Alan Moore is incredibly overrated. He did a really good job with whatever happened to what is it called? Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow about Superman. He did a good job with the Swamp Thing, but ultimately a lot of his stuff, including Batman Killing Joke, is incredibly overrated, including The Watchmen, incredibly overrated. V for Vendetta. That is just a confused mess. I don't know why anyone even really liked that series to begin with. But anyway, back to Zack Snyder. For me, it's kind of the same for Zack Snyder. Like I said, his movies are visually stunning, and they have really great scores, but he's just not that good of a director. He's not good at developing characters. His plots are often overly complicated for no reason. For instance, Man of Steel. My criticism of Man of Steel is it is saved from obscurity because Henry Cavill and Amy Adams are so good at acting. If it had not been for that, it would have been awful. He basically took um, the Superman Earth 1. So for those of you unfamiliar, Earth 1 is one of DC's imprints, and it's kind of a, how should I put this, like a what-if scenario. So instead of Superman being born years ago, Superman appears like today, like it takes place in the year that it came out. And in that one, Superman is basically acts like an angsty teen, and that's what he was in Man of Steel. And like Earth 1, he doesn't grow from that character. So in Superman, from Superman Earth 1, Volume 1 to Volume 2, he makes no character development. And it's the same for Dawn of Justice. When we get to Batman versus Superman, he is exactly the same way. He's this angsty guy who has an axe to grind against Batman, whom he's never even met. And they show the conflicting ways that justice is dealt between Superman and Batman. Also, he tried to hint, especially in the trailers for Dawn of Justice, that he took inspiration from Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns for Batman, which I think was kind of silly since obviously The Dark Knight Rises took inspiration from that. You know, he's kind of riffing off Christopher Nolan for no reason. And so then he casts Ben Affleck, who the superhero fan community already didn't like because of his role in Daredevil, and just poorly casted Batman with this awful Ben Affleck, who is a better director than he is actor. He's kind of hit and miss for me. I never understood the appeal of Ben Affleck. I don't think he's that good of an actor. It's, you know, like I said, he's very hit and miss. So some movies will be really good, other movies you're like, eh, and that's what Batman was. He was a poor Batman. And I know all these Gen Z fans are going to be commenting, oh my gosh, how can you say Ben Affleck is a bad Batman? He's a bad Batman. He reduces Batman's conflicts down to, oh, basically inside he's an angsty teenager. And that's not true of Batman. I know there's some, you know, normies who read Wikipedia and played the Arkham games and think they know everything there is to know about Batman, but it's just not true. Batman is supposed to be this real cunning, sharp genius who uses his wealth and his position to become this vigilante so that another child doesn't have to go through what he goes through. And instead he reduces him to this kind of almost sniveling guy who has a grudge against Superman, and lets Lex Luthor manipulate him. It's basically Sonic and Knuckles. So for those of you unfamiliar with Sonic the Hedgehog 3, the video game, Dr. Robotnik basically tricks Knuckles into thinking that Sonic is on Angel Island to steal the Master Emerald, when of course it's actually Dr. Robotnik who wants to steal the Master Emerald, and that's what Lex Luthor is. He basically is trying to trick Batman and almost succeeds, and then they have that pathetic scene where he's like, Martha, Martha. It's like, come on. That was it was the most poorly written, poorly directed, and poorly acted scene in any superhero movie I've ever seen, including Blade Trinity. I mean, it was just awful. Anyway, so he starts to do the Justice League and gets it into post-production, and Zack Snyder suffers a really personal tragedy, which I'm not going to riff on because that's obviously tragic. I think that is very sad. And Warner Brothers was kind of slimy in this, and they saw his cut, or the rough cut, I guess, and didn't like it, and so they kind of took advantage of him having to step back. They hired Joss Whedon, who I think is a better director than Zack Snyder, to kind of salvage the project. And to Joss Whedon's credit, he had to do a ton of research, do a ton of reshoots, and then meld the Snyder's vision with something that wouldn't subvert expectations but would exceed them, and he failed. Justice League is kind of a mediocre film. I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but it's definitely mediocre at the worst, I think. Or at best, I should say. It's mediocre at best. It was kind of like The Rise of Skywalker. You were expecting something else, and you got kind of like this bland, kind of attitude. And that was my reaction. And of course, Whedon didn't know what to make of Snyder's version of Batman, so then he kind of made Batman even worse. Also Ben Affleck. So Snyder is back and all this, and recently on Instagram, an account called The Jackal Dream posted an image, and it's Barry Allen in the Batmobile, and basically, he's saying that Whedon fused the Batcave with an abandoned Wayne hangar and made them one. So one of the captions reads, Alfred, working at the abandoned Wayne aerospace hangar, had to move workshop from Batcave as he and Bruce try and get Flying Fox to work. No room in the cave for such a big aircraft. And this is actually true. If you look at Batman versus Superman, the Batcave is incredibly small for some reason. That was, and it's small in the Nolan franchise as well, just to, not sound hypocritical, but Nolan didn't have all these gadgets. Batman basically had the tumbler, the suit, and a giant array of computer and forensic equipment, but enough that could be contained in a small space. But what Snyder was trying to do, he was trying to have his cake and eat it too. So he shows like this big Batcave that for some reason isn't under Wayne Manor. It wasn't like in Batman Begins and then to the Dark Knight where Wayne Manor gets destroyed, so they have to do the one in the Dark Knight as kind of a sub one, which that is actually comic book. They had Wayne Tower for a while, supplied Batman with a Batcave. Snyder, on the other hand, he moves the Batcave to this weird lake house that Bruce Wayne owns, and instead of Wayne Manor, and basically shows it as the Batcave, and with all this cool high-tech equipment. And nowhere in the film of Justice League do they mention that it's a hangar or that it's the Batcave. It's just kind of assumed that it is the Batcave, and I also don't know why they called the Batjet or Batwing. I don't know why they called it the Flying Fox. That was kind of a stupid name for it to begin with. So people are saying, oh, this is another example. He's showing another, basically another thing that Whedon did to change Justice League, and in a lot of these people's opinion, for the worse. So here's my thing with this. Zack Snyder needs to put up or shut up. He's been railing about the Snyder Cut. He's been posting images. So has Gal Gadot. So has Ben Affleck. They've all been kind of involved in this conspiracy to push the idea that there is a finished Snyder Cut that Warner Brothers, just for some snobbish reason, refuses to release. They just don't understand. Why won't they release this film? Now, previously I was on a podcast where they asked me about the Snyder Cut. I was debating another DC fan who he is all in love with Eric Blake. He's all in love with the Snyder films, and he even has the famous shirt that Snyder made for charity, which kudos to him, which showed his vision for what the Snyder Cut would look like. And that the host, Ginger Man, he asked me, do you think that the Snyder Cut is real, that it exists? And I said, yes, I think it exists, but I don't think it's finished. And I think that if Warner Brothers ever wanted to put it out, fans of it will be disappointed because they're going to have to fill in some of the gaps of Snyder with some of Joss Whedon's work. And there was also a report recently, a couple of months back. I say recently, it was actually a couple of months back, where someone said that someone from inside DC Entertainment had leaked that no, the Snyder Cut is not finished. It was never finished. And so that's a rumor. I could be wrong. This guy could be wrong, but that's kind of where we are. And so if it is real, Snyder needs to put up or shut up. He's Zack Snyder. He's clearly good at ginning up his dwindling fan base. He's good at getting them all angry about stuff. Obviously, his fan base isn't as big as the real Batman fans, but who fought against him and got Justice League changed and got Ben Affleck's Batman completely erased. Robert Pattinson will now play Batman in an upcoming Matt Reeves film. So my thing with this is he needs to put up or shut up. It's time for him to release at least some clips that are different, and I want to talk about the clips from the trailers, like a full-on sequence, something. He can put pressure on DC. He has this ability. All it takes to get a movie company to cave is 100 mean tweets, and they'll do it. Obviously, they're not uploading it to HBO Max. Warner Brothers is being very coy about it. They're not exactly talking about it. It's like Warner Brothers is kind of denying it exists. And Snyder posted a picture of, I guess, some reels, and it said Justice League, the Snyder Cut. Again, I don't think it's complete. Otherwise, I think he could have applied enough pressure to release it. And this latest thing where Whedon merges a Wayne hanger with the Batcave, who cares? Who gives a crap? So what? It was a smart move. Snyder already had too many ridiculous locations for you to keep up with. Whedon did the right thing by merging these. For one thing, in the comic books, the Batcave is big enough to house a plane. I think later, as the planes got bigger, they did change it where Bruce Wayne would launch from a Wayne hangar. He would have a secret one that he would kind of move around. He would close down one for a couple of days, and that way no one would be able to focus in on one area where it launched. But I think so. I don't necessarily think that that was a bad thing that Whedon changed, but I think that Zack Snyder ultimately he needs to put up or shut up. It's time for him to stop tweeting on Valentine's Day about a Subway sandwich with what would you put on a Snyder Cut sandwich? Put up or shut up. Because I'm tired of every time I make a comment about how awful Justice League was, about how terrible Dawn of Justice was, I get all these trolls coming after me, and I'm like, at least argue from a movie that has been released. They can't really defend Man of Steel. They can't really defend Dawn of Justice. And I hold to this. Anyone who says the Martha scene was good filming or good filmmaking, immediately they're not worth to debate. That scene is terrible. It was poorly written, and Zack Snyder should be run out of Hollywood just for that sequence. So enough of that. Now, Marvel Studios, as you know, has this deal with Sony. Before they decided to try to merge everything into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they actually had auctioned off a lot of their properties to different studios. It wasn't like DC Comics, which is owned by Warner Media. That's why all the movies are Warner Brothers, except for ones licensed out way early on. No, Marvel actually licensed them out, and they were trying to get them back, and they found a loophole so they could include Hulk in the Avengers films, but Universal, I think, still owns the what's the wrong, like the Hulk name, because they want to keep a ride. I guess there's a Hulk ride at one of their theme parks. So Marvel has been trying to get back Spider-Man from Sony, and after several misfires from Sony, they started out great with the Tobey Maguire films, but then they did studio interference on Sam Raimi for Spider-Man 3, and then they tried again with The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, which 1 was really good, but 2, the conclusion and the climax of the movie was really bad. So, and they also had too many characters to kind of keep up with. I didn't think that at the time, but I watched it a second time later, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is a little too much to keep up with. They introduced way too many characters, and some of them had weird casting, like Ben Novak from The Office was Alistair Smythe, the creator of the Spider Slayers. So anyway, neither here nor there. Now, we know that there's a couple of spin-offs coming. We've got Venom 2, of course the sequel to the first Venom. There's the Morbius film, which will probably be the first movie where Jared Leto actually can act. And now they've added another film to their slate. And there is a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a little bit of controversy because people don't know what it is. So they only have rights to Spider-Man properties. So that's basically any character, I guess minus the Punisher, who was created in basically the Spider-Man comic books. So, or were created specifically for the comic book. So they have the rights to characters like Silver Sable, who's a mercenary from Europe, who was hired to hunt Spider-Man, and Silver Sable later got her own spin-off called the Wild Pack, which was her, even though that was her team that she commanded. They also have the rights to Black Cat, who in some versions she's basically a wannabe Catwoman, but from DC Comics, of course. But there was an animated series in the 90s called Spider-Man where they made Black Cat more of an anti-hero, and they gave her different powers than she had in the comics, and that version to me is the best version of Black Cat. So they were going to do a movie called Silver Black, which was going to be like a crossover between Silver Sable and Black Cat. That was canceled, but then they said, oh no, it's going to be a miniseries on Hulu, but that never happened either. Last I heard, it was canceled. So basically, Sony is grasping at straws. They have very little in the way of Marvel properties, and which I always thought it was kind of weird, because Michael Morbius, he does first appear in Spider-Man, but I think he had his own series for a while, like the Punisher did, but somehow they have the rights. It's considered a Spider-Man property, and he was not only a main villain in the mainstream comic books, he was also a villain in the Ultimate Comics. And I think, now, one thing interesting about Morbius is he's actually a vampire created by science. He's not a vampire created by magic. So he doesn't have the weaknesses of a vampire, which makes it hard for Blade, the vampire hunter, to kill him. That's kind of like a theme in the comics. But in Ultimate comic books, they did make him like an actual vampire, I believe. So they actually added Michael Morbius as a villain in the same animated series I mentioned earlier, but instead of biting people, he had like these pressure points on his hand, and he would absorb people's plasma, not blood, plasma, by grabbing them, basically, instead of biting them. It was really interesting. So anyway, neither here nor there. So basically, though, it seems to me like, because during the whole Amazing Spider-Man series, they had wanted to do a Sinister Six movie. Now, originally, it was going to be a standalone film, and Spider-Man was going to kind of make an appearance at the end, but fans kind of thought that that was weird. Why would the Sinister Six get their own film? They're not the Suicide Squad. The Sinister Six are a very dangerous criminal cabal of Spidey's worst foes. So then they kind of backtracked off that, and they said that was going to be the Amazing Spider-Man 3. It was going to be a crossover with the Sinister Six, even though they had only introduced Rhino and the Green Goblin and a character called the Gentleman. Oh, and the Lizard, obviously. They'd only introduced those characters, so I don't know where they were going to get the number 6. Now, Spider-Man Homecoming actually introduced more than one villain. They introduced besides Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, they introduced Matt Gargan, who is, of course, the Scorpion. They introduced both the mainstream version and the ultimate version of the Shocker, which I thought was kind of an interesting move by them. They introduced the character who is the Prowler, and then, of course, with Michael Morbius in the trailer, they show Michael Keaton. Now, no one really knows for sure if he's actually going to be Adrian Toomes, but I think he is, because the wording and the phrasing he uses in the Morbius trailer. So, all that to say, I personally think that this mysterious new Marvel film that Sony is kind of hinting at, I personally think it's going to be another villain spinoff. I don't want that to be true, but I just think, in my heart of hearts, I want it to be they're introducing Spider-Woman, or they're introducing, the Prowler, or some other, like, vigilante character that they could make a franchise off of. But instead, but I honestly think they're going to introduce Kraven the Hunter, which I think that's kind of weird, but I think they're just doing it to stick in the eye of the MCU, because I think Sony is kind of salty with the fans, because they had this big dramatic break with Disney, but then the fans like almost went into a full riot to stop Sony from stealing Spider-Man, and I was one of them. I thought that that was a really dumb move. Sony was overestimating the cred they got with the fans based on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Venom, which are both entertaining films, especially Into the Spider-Verse. It's a fantastic animated film. At this point, I honestly think if Morbius and Venom 2 fail, which I think Morbius will, I don't think Venom 2 will, but I think if they fail, Sony just needs to give up. They just need to let Disney have Spider-Man, but work out a deal where they could still make the animated films, because they shouldn't base their success off this. And one of the reasons I said that a Craven film would be sticking in the eye of the MCU is because Black Panther 2, I believe Ryan Coogler and a couple of other people at Marvel have said that they wanted Craven to hunt T'Challa in a Black Panther sequel. It would be kind of like a standoff between two characters who are incredibly skilled, incredibly powerful. So I think that would be that would have been an interesting movie. I don't think that was right. There was an idea, or a rumor at least, that now that Marvel has taken the Fantastic Four, thanks to their acquisition of Fox, that they have that Doctor Doom was going to be the villain in Black Panther 2, because I believe there is a storyline in the comic books where Latveria and Wakanda go to war, and it was like a war thing, of course, with comic book-y stuff in it, but it was an actual war saga. So that would be interesting to see. I would love to see that adapted. I think that's right now that Wakanda is out in the open after Black Panther and after the Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. I would like to see that connection made. That way they could introduce Doctor Doom. Another rumor is that it's going to be Namor the Submariner. That's another character that Disney and Marvel acquired from the acquisition of Fox. They got Namor back. That's another one. Now, my problem though with that is Namor, it seems like based on whoever is writing that day, his power kind of fluctuates. So there was a thing where Atlantis attacks Wakanda and a lot of Wakandas die, and so T'Challa and Namor have like the showdown, and the line that Killmonger utters, "Every second you breathe is mercy for me," that's from that comic book, but it's T'Challa actually saying it to Namor, not Killmonger saying it to T'Challa. So what would I do in this scenario? Because honestly, T'Challa isn't strong enough to fight Namor unless he's wearing some really souped up Black Panther outfit. That's just not the case. He's Captain America strong at the most. Now in the movies, they kind of made him a little bit stronger than that. But I would be curious to see how they would do this, because in the comic books, Namor is like as strong as Captain Marvel and Hulk and Thor. He can hold his own against them. He doesn't have like all their fancy powers, but he's incredibly strong. I believe that and when he's connected to water, he's even stronger. But he can control the seas. He's got super strength. He's bulletproof. Basically, magic attacks barely hurt him, and he can fly. Basically, the Avengers, how they usually beat him is they just kind of overwhelm him, or somehow Hulk gets angry enough where he's able to beat him with his strength. So I don't know how they're going to do that. Maybe they'll tone down his powers like they didn't with Captain Marvel. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, one final note on the Venom sequel, they did release a first look picture. Tom Hardy released it and then promptly deleted it, but it was supposed to be a first look picture of Woody Harrelson as Cletus Kassidy. He doesn't have the wig like he did in his cameo in Venom. He has short red hair, which is kind of one of Kassidy's trademarks. He's wearing ordinary clothes. It honestly was not that special of a picture. I don't know why Sony made him delete it, or maybe it was the director, Andy Serkis. Yes, that Andy Serkis, who played King Kong, who played Smeagol in Lord of the Rings. He is directing this. He's directed before. This is one of his first major films. So I don't get what the big deal about it was. It didn't really reveal anything, in my opinion, but they did make him deleted, and I'm going to have more on that on my blog. And that is all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for listening to my podcast. Once again, be sure to like this video, share it out, and also subscribe if you're on YouTube, and like my page and follow it if you're on Facebook. My Facebook, of course, is author Jacob Airy, and you can find me on Twitter at RealJacobAiry. Instagram is also at RealJacobAiry. Go to my blog and subscribe there. You can subscribe by email or through WordPress. It's jacobairy.blog, JACOBAIREY.blog. You can find my movie reviews, my commentary, all kinds of cool stuff. I've got a ton of top 10s lists. Some have been controversial, but I don't care. I write what I write, and I like what I like. Also, do you have a friend who has a birthday coming up? They're kind of a bookworm, so you don't really know what to get them. Why don't you get them my novel? I have a fantasy novel called The Seven Royals, All Good Things. It's about a prince named Jasher, and he unites a ton of your favorite fairy tale characters to go to battle against the evil mage Fabius Thorn and the Emperor Midas, who of course can turn people to gold with just a touch. They have Midas and Thorn have conquered Prince Jasher and the others' land, and they have this big magical cloud that prevents the sunlight from coming through, allowing all of these evil creatures to overwhelm the land. But Jasher and his friends, they're going to take the land back with Jasher and his mystical blue sword. So definitely head over to Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, Walmart.com, download it from Kobo if you're on Rakuten, or get it directly from my publisher, BookLocker.com. That's all the time I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you next time, right here on Studio Jake.